I stood at the subway entrance, clutching my purse like a shield, as my daughter waved her Metro card for everyone but me. "We're not wasting a ticket on an old cow," she muttered, loud enough for the teenagers behind us to laugh. My cheeks burned, but I didn't move. Not yet. The turnstile beeped, her son skipped through, and then a security guard stepped toward me. He took one look at my ID, and everything changed. "Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe." Rush hour in the New York subway had its own kind of chaos. Muffled announcements, the hum of trains, the occasional distant scream of metal on metal. The air was thick with impatience, perfume, sweat, and something else. Eyes that never wanted to linger too long. Maggie O'Connor stepped behind her daughter and granddaughter into the packed station, the scuffed tiles underfoot slick from a brief rain. She walked slower than most, knees stiff, back proud, purse clutched tightly under one arm. A wool coat hung heavy on her shoulders, worn but neat, just like she was. Diane didn't slow. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor, tailored coat flaring with every step like she was walking a runway, not public transit. "Let's move, Lily," she snapped, tossing a glance over her shoulder. "She'll catch up." Lily hesitated, one sneaker dragging just a second too long. They reached the turnstiles, and Diane pulled out her Metro card with a flick of her wrist, scanning it through like a magician with a wand. The green arrow blinked. She passed through. Lily followed, carting herself in quietly. Maggie approached, fumbling with the clasp on her purse, fishing for her wallet. Her hands trembled, not from age, but from the quiet weight she already felt forming in the air. She was close enough to hear Diane mutter under her breath. But Diane didn't stay quiet. As Maggie reached the turnstile, Diane turned toward Lily and hissed, loud enough for everyone around to hear, "We're not wasting a ticket on old cow." Silence, or something like it, dropped in a 10-foot radius. A man in a Yankees cap looked up. A woman in scrubs blinked slowly. Even the turnstile beeped like it was offended. Maggie froze. Her hand stopped halfway in her bag. Her breath caught. She didn't look at Diane. She didn't need to. That tone, that voice, had been following her for years, each word soaked in resentment, superiority, and something crueler than either. Embarrassment. The kind of shame that dressed itself in wealth and nice shoes and whispered, "You're not good enough to be seen with me." Lily's head dropped. Her ponytail swung forward like a curtain. She couldn't look at her mother. Couldn't look at her grandmother either. Maggie swallowed hard and tried to steady her fingers. They weren't cooperating. Her purse opened too wide, then too small. Cards slipped sideways in her wallet. She couldn't find it. Not fast enough. The line behind her started shifting, people stepping around her to find other turnstiles. No one said anything. That was the worst part. No defense, no scolding. Just silence. The kind that agreed with the insult by doing nothing at all. She found the card finally, the plastic senior ID, bent slightly at one corner. She pulled it free with stiff fingers. Someone nearby chuckled. Just a short, ugly sound, and it cut deeper than any word. Maggie stood straight. She didn't cry, didn't shrink, but her eyes were glassy, and her cheeks were hot. And for 1 second she wished the floor would just open up and swallow her. A loud voice cut across the station. "Ma'am, excuse me. Can I see that ID?" A man in a dark blue MTA uniform stepped forward from the side, near the customer assistance booth. He looked young, no older than 40, with warm brown skin and sharp eyes that missed nothing. His name tag read Torres. He had been watching. Maggie turned slowly and extended the card, hand steady now. He took it gently, like it was something delicate. Torres scanned the ID, looked up, then looked again. You worked for the MTA? He asked, his voice a strange mix of surprise and respect. Maggie nodded once, softly. 30 years. Behind her, Diane let out a scoffing laugh. She's nothing now. Torres didn't even look at her. His eyes stayed on Maggie. He turned slightly, raising his voice just enough to be heard. She's earned free lifetime transit. A ripple moved through the small crowd. Someone murmured, "Good for her." Another woman, older, nodded approvingly. The mood shifted, just slightly, like a door had cracked open in a locked room. Diane's jaw tensed. Torres handed back the ID with both hands. "You don't go through a turnstile, ma'am. You go through the service gate. Come with me." Maggie hesitated. Not because she didn't want to go, but because for a split second she remembered every time her daughter had looked at her like she was disposable, and every time Maggie had swallowed it. Lily looked up, eyes wide with something between shame and awe. Maggie stepped forward. As she walked with Torres toward the service gate, the space behind her felt smaller, and the air ahead felt cleaner. And somewhere inside the station, a whisper stirred behind her heart. Dignity costs more than fare. Torres studied the senior ID again, turning it slightly under the flickering station light as if it might reveal more than just name and number. Margaret O'Connor, he read out, slow and respectful. Then, softer, almost to himself. This badge used to mean something. It still does, Maggie wanted to say, but didn't. Instead, she stood still, watching his eyes scan the faded laminate and settle on the tiny, almost forgotten emblem in the bottom corner. Retired transit employee. A tiny insignia only a handful of people would even recognize. He looked up, at her again, this time not with curiosity, but recognition. "You put in time with the MTA?" he asked, voice steady. 30 years, Maggie said, her chin lifting just a little, enough for her posture to fight gravity. Torres gave a short nod, impressed. "Clerical, ops, or field?" "All three," she answered. "Started behind a counter, ended in scheduling." Behind them, Diane scoffed loud enough for emphasis. Don't make her sound like she was some kind of hero. She sat at a desk and whined about overtime Torres didn't turn around. Instead, he stepped closer to Maggie, not invading, but closing the distance like a shield being raised. "Well," he said, voice clearer now, addressing both Maggie and the air around them. "Then this ID entitles you to free lifetime rides on all city lines." The air seemed to shift, not dramatically, but just enough. The clamor of the station, the boots slapping tiles, the screech of an arriving train, they all seemed to hush. A teenage boy, earbuds in, glanced up. A nurse waiting behind the turnstile raised her eyebrows. The man in the Yankees cap from earlier leaned forward, not quite eavesdropping, but close. Torres stepped to the side and held out an arm. "Right this way, ma'am." Through the gate, Maggie hesitated again, not from doubt, but from the deep-rooted instinct to not cause trouble, not make a scene. That old, worn-in reflex that had been trained into her by years of motherhood, of silence, of being grateful for what you get. Then Lily moved. She crossed behind Diane and stood next to Maggie, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The gesture was small, but deliberate, and it changed something. Maggie exhaled slowly and nodded once to Torres. As they began to walk toward the gate, the nurse behind the turnstile murmured, "Good for her," just loud enough to be heard. Someone clapped once. Not a full applause, just one sharp, supportive beat. Torres glanced back over his shoulder. "I meant it, you know. You should be celebrated, not belittled." Maggie met his eyes, and for the first time in what felt like days, maybe years, she let herself smile. Not wide, not performative. Just a quiet smile that said, "I remember who I am." Behind them, Diane folded her arms tightly across her chest, the kind of posture that built walls no one was asking to cross. Her mouth twisted like she was about to speak, but Lily shot her a warning glance. Not angry, just disappointed. That landed harder than any argument. Torres held open the service gate. Maggie stepped through slowly, every joint reminding her of its age, but her spine straighter than when she'd entered the station. When she turned to wait for Lily, she noticed the man in the Yankees cap give her a nod, slow and solemn, like she'd won something no one else could see. She nodded back, and in the quiet space between them, a whisper surfaced. Not hers, not anyone's, but felt. Dismissed by blood, honored by strangers. She looked over at Lily, who followed her through the gate, keeping her head low. There was something like shame in her expression, but also resolve. Torres touched his earpiece, murmured into his radio. Command. This is Torres at 82nd. I've got a retired MTA employee here. Recognition issue. Might want to flag this. He glanced at Maggie and smiled again. Let's get someone on the line who still remembers what service used to look like. The gate clicked open with a mechanical clunk, and Torres extended his arm to guide Maggie forward. Not with a hand on her back. Not with urgency, but with quiet deference, like the kind of gesture saved for someone who'd earned it. Maggie stepped through first. The smell of metal and damp concrete still hung in the air, but something had shifted. People noticed her now. Not with pity, not with scorn, just attention. She could feel their eyes as she passed, some curious, some oddly gentle, a few tinged with recognition, like they'd all seen something small but true break the surface of a very ordinary moment. Lily trailed behind, close but not too close, her hands shoved into the sleeves of her hoodie. Her gaze flicked nervously between Maggie and the floor. Diane, standing rigid at the turnstile, didn't move. Her lips parted like she might say something. Demand an explanation, offer a backhanded apology, or at least call out to her daughter. But nothing came. Just the tight squint of someone unaccustomed to being ignored in public. Torres walked slightly ahead now, his stride easy but purposeful. He didn't look back at Diane. Not once. That, somehow, was the most damning gesture of all. As they reached the far side of the station, past the turnstiles and the vending machines, Maggie glanced at her reflection in the dark window of a closed newsstand. Her hat was a little crooked. Her hair, once iron gray, looked white under the fluorescent lights. There were lines around her eyes. She didn't remember seeing this deep before. But there was something new, too. A straightness in her shoulders. The look of someone who had been underestimated for so long, she'd started to believe it herself, and was now feeling that belief slip. A soft voice caught up behind her. Grandma? Maggie turned her head. Lily had slowed her pace and was looking directly at her, face pale, jaw tight. I'm sorry, Lily whispered, eyes shining, voice just above the hum of the crowd. For what she said. For not saying anything, Maggie didn't answer right away. Instead, she took in her granddaughter's expression, that complicated mix of shame and loyalty that lived between generations. She knew that face well. She used to wear it for her own mother. It's all right, Maggie said finally, gently. You stayed. Lily nodded, quickly, swallowing a lump in her throat. Torres paused at the bottom of the escalator. Elevator's out today. You good with stairs? Stairs never stopped me, Maggie said, and immediately regretted how winded she felt just from crossing the station. But she didn't show it. Not today. As they moved down, slowly but steadily, Torres kept pace beside her without hurrying or offering unnecessary help. I meant what I said back there, he said, voice low enough that it wasn't for the crowd, just for her. You should be celebrated, not mocked. Maggie glanced sideways. Celebrated's a big word. It fits, Torres replied simply. She allowed herself a faint smile, the kind that only reached the corner of her mouth but carried weight. Like a safe being cracked open a notch. They reached the platform. The train hadn't arrived yet, but the bench was empty. Maggie sat, knees cracking audibly as she eased down. Lily sat beside her, close this time, not hiding in the corners. Torres radioed in again. MTA command, update, employee identified, requesting callback from Linda Farrell. He looked over at Maggie. She runs admin at HQ now. If anyone should know your name, it's her. Maggie blinked slowly. Linda Farrell. She hadn't thought of her in over a decade. They'd worked side by side on graveyard shifts, back when Maggie had handled the Brooklyn rotation. Kind woman. Smart. Had once brought Maggie soup during a nasty flu season. Still there? Maggie asked. Torres nodded. Got promoted last year. Runs most of the division now. Maggie leaned back slightly against the bench. There was a kind of silence that didn't feel empty, just full of everything left unspoken. And then, over the intercom, please stand clear. Train approaching. The tracks hummed, and the wind began to move through the tunnel. Lily brushed a strand of hair from her face, leaned in, and rested her head lightly on Maggie's shoulder, just for a second. The rumble grew louder. The lights in the tunnel flickered to life. Maggie straightened her coat, pulled her purse closer to her side, and looked ahead. She wasn't just going home. She was going forward. The train had pulled in, but Maggie didn't board. She stood beside the platform bench, one hand resting lightly on the backrest. Her weight shifted just slightly forward, not from exhaustion, but from something else. Readiness. Torres stepped a few paces away to take the call, facing the far end of the platform where the signal was clearer. He pressed 2 fingers to his earpiece, voice low but energized. Command, patch me through to Linda Farrell. Tell her it's regarding a former employee, Margaret O'Connor. It's not a security issue, it's a recognition one. There was a pause. Static buzzed faintly from the receiver. Then a voice, tinny and female, came through. Hold, please. Maggie caught the name again. Linda. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Lily stood beside her now, fidgeting with the strap of her backpack. Her silence was full, an apology still hanging in the air, but more than that, a question. What happens next? Maggie didn't answer, but her grip on the bench tightened just a little. Across the platform, Torres turned back and gave her a small thumbs up. She's on, he called out. He tapped a button and brought the radio unit closer, switching it to speaker mode. Linda? Torres asked. A voice came through, stronger now, clear, clipped, professional. This is Farrell. What's going on, Ramon? Torres didn't hesitate. I'm here with a retired transit clerk. Senior ID flagged her as former staff, Maggie O'Connor. There was silence on the line. Then, wait, Maggie O'Connor? From the Brooklyn schedule desk? Midnight shifts? Her voice cracked slightly with surprise, tinged with something warmer. Maggie blinked. Her shoulders twitched. Torres glanced back at her, then replied, She's right here. Another beat of silence. Then Linda said softly now, I haven't heard that name in a long time. Maggie stepped forward, heart ticking faster than she wanted to admit. Linda? Oh my God, Maggie. Are you all right? The kindness in the voice hit her harder than she expected. Like being offered a blanket you didn't realize you were freezing without. I'm okay, Maggie said. I didn't expect to be remembered. Are you kidding me? Linda laughed. You held that department together for 10 years. You trained half the staff that's still here, including me. Torres raised an eyebrow, impressed. Maggie said nothing for a moment. Something inside her shifted, unmoored from the weight of invisibility. Linda's voice sharpened. Where are you? We need to see you. I want you to come down to headquarters. Maggie hesitated, glancing toward the train again. Now? If you're free. Or tomorrow. Whatever you prefer. I'll clear my schedule. I don't know, Maggie said carefully. It's been a long time. I don't know what I'd even be walking into. You're not walking into anything, Linda replied firmly. You're walking back into what you built. We owe you a visit. Not the other way around. Maggie felt Lily shift beside her, head turning, posture straightening. Before she could respond, another voice chimed in behind them. Diane. She had followed after all. Her heels clacked loudly down the stairwell as she approached, arms crossed, mouth already curled into a sneer. Oh, come on, she said. You're not actually falling for this, are you? It's been years. She's not some legend. She's a retired office worker who couldn't even keep her mailbox in order. Torres moved slightly in front of Maggie. Instinctive, not aggressive, just enough to draw a boundary. Maggie didn't react to Diane. She looked straight ahead at the wall across the tracks, eyes fixed on something no one else could see. I'll come, she said quietly, but clearly. Tomorrow. Linda's voice brightened on the line. I'll be waiting. Diane scoffed, flipping her hair. This is absurd. Don't indulge her fantasies. Lily turned. She didn't yell, she didn't cry. She just said, You don't get to talk anymore. Diane's jaw twitched, but she said nothing else. Maggie stepped back from the platform edge, and this time, she didn't look down. She looked at Torres, who gave her a small nod. And as they began to walk away, the station noise resumed, but nothing felt quite as loud as the voice Maggie now carried inside her. The next morning, Manhattan shimmered under a sharp autumn sun, the kind that made glass buildings glow but did nothing for the chill in the air. Maggie stood outside the MTA headquarters building, coat buttoned high, scarf tucked tightly beneath her chin. She stared up at the revolving door for a beat too long. You sure? Lily asked gently, standing close beside her. Maggie nodded once. I've walked into tougher rooms. Inside, the lobby was all polished tile and security glass, a quiet hum of activity moving through metal detectors and ID swipes. Maggie's shoes tapped softly on the floor as they approached the front desk. The clerk glanced up. Name? Margaret O'Connor. Linda Farrell's expecting me. Something in the man's posture changed. He stood straighter, keyed something in, then smiled politely. 17th floor. Elevators on your left. The ride up felt longer than it was. Lily stood silently, glancing once at her grandmother, who stared ahead, jaw set, but not tight, just prepared. The elevator opened into a sunlit hallway. A door at the end stood ajar, and a voice called out warmly, Send her in. Linda Farrell was standing at her desk when they entered. Shoulders relaxed, glasses perched halfway down her nose, blazer slightly wrinkled, like someone who worked too hard to care about creases. Maggie, she said, eyes lighting up, you look exactly the same. You need a stronger prescription, Maggie replied dryly, but a smile tugged at her mouth. They embraced briefly, two women who hadn't hugged in over a decade, but still knew exactly how to. Linda gestured to the chairs across from her desk. Sit, both of you. I've pulled your files. Maggie raised an eyebrow. I figured this was more of a courtesy visit. Linda shook her head. You don't know, do you? She turned her monitor toward them, clicking through rows of scanned documents. We digitized the entire employee archive last year. I ran your name last night. Wanted to see if we still had your service record. She pulled up a timeline. Maggie's name appeared in bold at the top, followed by line after line of notes, evaluations, and promotions. The screen looked like a resume built by time itself. You were never flagged for pension adjustment, Linda said, scrolling down. But in 2004, the city passed a retroactive service recalibration rule. Employees who covered 3 divisions, admin, operations, and scheduling qualify for Tier A recalculation. I was never told any of that, Maggie said, frowning. Linda nodded. Because your account was marked completed back in '09, before the system updated. You were never notified. She clicked once more. There's also this, she said, turning the screen. Payroll audit shows you're owed a pension adjustment. And back pay? Maggie blinked. How much? Linda hesitated, then said it anyway. Rough estimate, low six figures, closer to 70 or 80,000 after taxes. Could be more depending on the recalibration review. The room went still. Even Lily leaned back in her seat, eyes wide. You're joking, Maggie whispered. I wouldn't joke about this, Linda said. You earned every cent of it. Just then, the office door creaked open. Diane. She stepped inside like she owned the air, her heels clicking fast against the floor. Kyle followed awkwardly behind, holding a coffee he clearly hadn't been asked to bring. We came to stop this circus, Diane began. Before she embarrasses herself. Linda looked up, unimpressed. And you are? I'm her daughter, Diane said, stepping forward. She's confused. She thinks you all owe her something, but you don't. Linda stood slowly, squaring her shoulders. Actually, we do. Quite a bit, in fact. She turned the screen toward Diane. These are your mother's records. She worked nearly 3 decades across multiple departments, never missed a review, no write-ups, supported transitions during 3 policy overhauls and 2 transit strikes. Do you know how rare that is? Diane's mouth opened, then closed. Kyle muttered, I told you this might not be a good idea. Maggie stayed seated, spine straight, gaze calm. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. But something in her eyes flickered, like a pilot light being relit. Linda continued, voice softer now. Maggie, we're going to honor this. All of it. We'll expedite the recalculation. You'll start receiving the adjusted pension next quarter, and the retroactive balance will be processed this month. Lily let out a tiny breath, half laugh, half disbelief. Diane stepped back as if the air had shifted. Maggie finally spoke. You thought I was a burden, she said, looking straight at Diane. Turns out I was a ledger left open. No one replied. Outside the window, the city moved like it always had. Buses groaning down the avenue, people streaming past crosswalks. But inside, something fundamental had tilted. Maggie stood slowly, collected, dignified. And as Diane fumbled for something to say, Maggie walked past her. Coat buttoned, purse in hand. The apartment felt colder than usual. Maggie sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in front of her gone lukewarm. Outside the small window, Queens was beginning its late afternoon descent into dusk. Buses groaning up 35th Avenue, kids kicking a half-flat basketball down the sidewalk, a dog barking in the distance. Normalcy everywhere, except in this room. Diane stood by the counter, arms folded tight, her expression a strained blend of indignation and defense. I just don't understand what this little victory lap is supposed to prove, she said. The MTA finds some dusty file, throws you a check, and suddenly you're Joan of Arc? Maggie didn't respond. Not right away. She reached slowly into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. It was creased at the corners, sealed tight, postmarked from 4 months ago. The return address read, Metropolitan Transit Authority, Office of Pensions. I found this in your credenza, she said quietly. Diane's lips parted, just slightly. It was under a pile of catalogs, Maggie added. Unopened. Diane's voice turned sharp. What were you doing in my things? I was looking for a screwdriver, Maggie said, still calm. But I found this instead. You want to explain? Diane snatched the envelope from the table, eyes scanning it like it might rewrite itself. Then, flat denial. I don't know what that is. You didn't see it? I don't open your mail, Diane snapped. God, you're being paranoid. That probably got mixed in by mistake. Lily, standing in the archway between the kitchen and living room, slowly raised her phone. Its camera lens was already pointed at the two of them. Diane saw it. Her voice dropped, bitter and brittle. Turn that off. I'm not recording, Lily lied, though her thumb hovered above the button. Lily. Diane started, but Maggie cut in, her tone firmer now. Why intercept my mail? There was no anger in her voice, just something cooler, more dangerous. Diane laughed, one of those hollow, humorless barks that people use to stall their own guilt. You want the truth? She said, crossing her arms tighter. Fine. I read the first one when it came. Something about updated pension, reviews. You hadn't even asked about it. You wouldn't have known what to do with it. So you decided I shouldn't see it at all, Maggie said, voice even. You'd waste it, Diane said, the words falling out like venom. You'd give it away, or spend it on junk, or just let it sit there until the state took it back. Kyle, seated awkwardly on the couch, cleared his throat. He hadn't looked up once. I told her not to throw it out, he muttered, eyes on the floor. You didn't stop her, though, Maggie said, not even glancing his way. I didn't think it was a big deal. It wasn't your decision, Maggie said flatly. A beat of silence filled the kitchen. You could hear the radiator ticking. Lily was still holding the phone. Diane's eyes flashed toward it. You're seriously recording this? I want to remember the moment, Lily said, her voice trembling but clear. When Grandma stopped letting you lie. Diane's mouth tightened, a vein twitching near her temple. She looked like she might lunge, or cry, or both. Instead, she reached for her purse, slung it over her shoulder, and knocked her chair back as she stormed out. The front door slammed so hard it rattled the picture frames on the wall. Kyle stood slowly, like a man realizing the roof had just caved in, but pretending it was just a little dust. I'll head out too, he said. Maggie didn't stop him. Neither did Lily. When the door clicked shut behind him, silence returned. Fuller this time, cleaner. Maggie stood slowly and walked to the window. She watched Diane's car peel away from the curb with unnecessary acceleration, a tantrum disguised as driving. Lily stepped beside her. She'll come back, Lily said softly. Let her, Maggie replied. But next time, she'll knock. She reached over and gently took Lily's phone, turned off the camera, set it on the table. She recorded my silence for years, Maggie said. Now it's my turn. The law office was quiet, too clean, like a place where no one raised their voice, and everything came sealed in manila folders. Maggie sat on the edge of a dark leather chair, her purse in her lap, hands neatly folded over the strap. Lily sat beside her, back straight, one ankle nervously circling the other. Across the oak desk, Daniel Price, mid-40s and soft-spoken with sharp eyes and a Brooklyn accent that hadn't faded, flipped through a stack of documents with surgical precision. The pension letters, he muttered, half to himself. Original MTA service records. Recalculation notice. And these are the sealed envelopes you found in your daughter's home? Maggie nodded. Postmarked months ago, all unopened. Hidden. Daniel exhaled slowly, almost impressed. And she admitted it? On tape, Lily said, reaching into her backpack and pulling out her phone. She scrolled for a moment, then played back the recording. Diane's voice filled the office, bitter and unmistakable. You'd waste it. Daniel stopped the audio, nodded once, and leaned back in his chair. Well, he said calmly, that's elder financial exploitation. Textbook. Maggie looked at him. That's a real thing? Daniel turned the screen of his tablet toward her, showing a legal statute. New York Penal Law Section 260.32, he said. It covers intentional interference with the lawful assets of an elderly person. What you've got here is willful mail interception and financial control. Add in the verbal coercion, the isolation. He paused, glancing at Lily. She lives with you? He asked. Maggie shook her head. I live with her. Or, I did. Daniel nodded like that made it worse. I can file a protective order by the end of the day, he said. It'll restrict her access to your accounts, your property, and any future benefits. We'll also log the recording as evidence and initiate a claim for restitution if needed. Lily looked relieved. Maggie looked something else. Not afraid. Not shaken. Just worn. Like the hinges had finally given out on a door that had been held shut too long. Would she be charged? Maggie asked. Daniel hesitated. That depends. Most DAs avoid criminal charges in family cases unless the abuse is ongoing or severe. It was ongoing, Maggie said quietly. It was just silent. Daniel studied her for a moment, then clicked his pen. We'll file a formal statement with Adult Protective Services as well. You don't have to go through this alone. Maggie chuckled softly. Not bitter, just amazed. I've been alone in it for years, she said. The only difference now is, I've got paper. Lily reached over and gently touched her grandmother's hand. Maggie didn't look, but she gave the hand a small squeeze. Daniel printed a form and turned it around. This gives me permission to file on your behalf. No cost to you. The state covers elder protection proceedings. Maggie took the pen slowly, hand trembling not from fear but from the sudden weight of a moment that meant something. She signed. I can't guarantee she won't retaliate, Daniel warned. These things have a way of spilling into the public eye, especially if she fights back. She already fought, Maggie said, with silence. With shame. I'm done with both. Daniel nodded, impressed. You've got backbone, Ms. O'Connor. No, Maggie replied. I've got history. And now, apparently, a lawyer. He smiled. As they stood to leave, Daniel walked them to the elevator. I'll call you tomorrow with an update on the court filing. We'll get you a hearing date. The doors slid open, revealing the polished brass interior of the elevator car. Maggie stepped in first, then turned to face him. Thank you, she said. You believe me? He met her gaze. You brought the proof. And you stopped apologizing. As the doors closed, Maggie exhaled, not like someone who had escaped something, but like someone finally stepping toward it, on her own terms. The next morning, Maggie was finishing her toast when Lily nearly dropped her phone into the sink. Oh my God, she whispered. She posted it. Maggie looked up from her tea. Who? Lily didn't answer right away, just walked slowly over, face pale, phone shaking slightly in her hand. She turned the screen to show Maggie. It was a Facebook post. Diane O'Connor. Some of you have seen that my mother is dragging our family through legal drama for attention and money. She's not some wronged hero. She's delusional, broke, and bitter. Always has been. Don't be fooled by her sob story. Below the post, an old photo of Maggie taken without her knowing, slouched slightly in a waiting room chair, face tired, eyes closed. The comments were already rolling in. Lily scrolled. Terrell B. Wait. Margaret O'Connor? The lady who ran Midtown schedules in 2001? She trained me. She's the reason I got promoted. Angela M. I remember her. Never raised her voice once. Got us through the holiday surge without a single panic attack. Diane, this is Low Rachel D. Your mom helped me when my car broke down outside Jamaica Center at 2 a.m. Sat with me till roadside came. You should be ashamed, Carlos MTA Ops. Don't talk about her like that. She gave my sister a reference when she was barely 19. Got her that first job in payroll. We owe her, Maggie read slowly, one line at a time. She wasn't smiling. Not exactly. But her breathing changed. Deeper. Calmer. I didn't know they remembered me, she said softly. Lily shook her head. Of course they did. You mattered. She's just the only one who ever made you feel like you didn't. Maggie reached out and gently scrolled back to the top of the post. Save it, she said. Every comment. Screenshot everything. Lily nodded, already organizing them into folders. The comment count ticked upward, 32, 47, 63. Then Diane replied to her own post. Don't believe the hype. She's manipulating all of you. She's trying to sue her own daughter. Nia R. replied instantly. If my mom stole my pension letters and called me delusional, I'd sue too. This is elder abuse, plain and simple. Someone posted a link to the legal definition of elder exploitation under New York law. Others shared screenshots of articles about pension fraud. By noon, the post had over 100 comments, and not one of them stood with Diane. Lily looked up from her phone. You want me to write something back? No, Maggie said firmly. Let her speak. Let everyone see what it looks like when the truth stays quiet, and the lie won't shut up. She walked over to the window and stood still, eyes scanning the sidewalk below. A UPS truck parked crookedly on the corner. A couple argued gently over coffee orders. A dog barked at its own reflection in a car door. Everything was so normal, and yet, it all felt a little different. Not lighter, not cleaner, just undeniable. She's unraveling, Lily said behind her. You didn't even have to do anything. Maggie nodded slowly. That's the part people don't understand. Sometimes, truth doesn't need defense. She looked down at her hands. The wrinkles, the calluses, the veins rising like the roots of a tree. She had built her life with these hands. And now she wasn't hiding them. Daniel Price's office smelled faintly of printer toner and lemonwood polish. A copy machine hummed softly in the background, spitting out packet after packet of documents he had labeled meticulously. O'Connor v. O'Connor. Maggie sat quietly at the conference table, watching him work. He moved with crisp efficiency, double-checking exhibits, flagging deposition statements, and slotting them into color-coded folders. Each folder had a name: pension documentation, mail interception evidence, social media defamation, witness testimonies. This one's Torres, he said, tapping a Navy folder. I got a formal statement from him this morning. He'll testify about what happened at the station, the comment, the ID, the crowd response. It'll frame the context of public humiliation and reinforce your credibility. Maggie nodded, but her eyes were elsewhere, focused but distant. Lily, across from her, was flipping through her own notes. A hand-scribbled list of memories, dates, times, phrases her mother had said. The last line was underlined 3 times. You'd waste it. You ready? Daniel asked, glancing at her. Lily looked up. Yeah, I am. He smiled faintly. You'll do fine. The judge isn't looking for drama, just facts. Maggie looked at Lily then, really looked, and noticed something had shifted. Not just the posture, not just the resolve. Her granddaughter was carrying weight now. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Chose to. Across the room, Daniel pulled out another folder. This one's for your daughter. Maggie didn't speak. Daniel placed it in front of her carefully, like a lit match on dry grass. Public social media posts. Screenshots. Community comments. We'll use them not to punish, but to show a pattern of gaslighting, isolation, and reputational harm. Maggie exhaled slowly. Her hands rested flat on the table. She didn't shake. But she wasn't at peace, either. She's going to walk into that courtroom with a blowout, a new coat, and a story that makes her look like a saint, she said quietly. She always does. Let her, Daniel replied. We'll walk in with the truth. The elevator dinged outside the office, and a moment later, the front door opened. Diane, right on cue. She entered like someone attending a real estate closing, not a legal prep session. Heels perfect, makeup calculated, a smirk halfway stapled to her face. Kyle followed a few steps behind her, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes avoiding everyone's. "This whole thing is ridiculous," Diane said, striding in. "You think a judge is going to take her seriously?" "She's a confused old woman with a grudge, and a granddaughter who plays videographer." Daniel didn't respond. He just gestured to the chairs on the far side of the room. "Ms. O'Connor, you're not required to be here. But if you want to speak, speak. Then sit." Diane raised an eyebrow. "You think you're intimidating?" "I think I'm organized," Daniel said. Kyle sat down quietly. Diane remained standing. "Just so we're clear," she said, sweeping her gaze over Maggie. "You can't erase everything just because a few bus drivers commented on Facebook." Maggie's voice was soft, but firm. "No one's trying to erase anything." "I'm trying to restore what you hid," Diane scoffed. "I'm not scared of this little courtroom stunt." Maggie looked at her for a long, quiet moment, then turned to Kyle. He hadn't looked up once, hadn't said a word, just sat there, breathing through his nose like a man trying not to be seen. "Say something," Maggie said. He blinked, met her eyes. And then, nothing. Not defense, not apology, not even guilt. Just silence. It landed harder than any insult Diane could have flung. Maggie stood, pushed in her chair. Daniel handed her a slim folder. "Court date is set for Friday at 9 a.m. Manhattan Family Court. Judge Steinberg. Wear something that makes you feel like yourself." Maggie looked down at the folder, then at Lily, then at Diane. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't need to. The courtroom was colder than Maggie expected. Heavy fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Everything, the wood-paneled walls, the stiff-backed benches, even the bailiff's expression, seemed carved from stone and rules. She sat at the petitioner's table with Daniel to her right, and Lily just behind them, her notebook clutched like a shield. Across the aisle sat Diane, impeccably dressed, teeth too white, eyes dead cold. Kyle sat beside her, hands folded, eyes down. Not once did he look Maggie's way. The court clerk called it O'Connor versus O'Connor, petition for protective relief and financial restitution under elder exploitation statute. Judge Steinberg, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, adjusted her glasses and scanned the docket. Her voice was calm but carried weight. "Let's proceed." Diane stood first, smiling faintly as if auditioning for a role she thought she'd already won. "Your Honor," she began, "I love my mother. But she's confused. This entire ordeal is a reaction to aging, resentment, and the pressures of living alone. She's been erratic for years, losing things, forgetting bills. The court needs to understand this isn't exploitation, it's concern. Misguided maybe, but not malicious." Maggie didn't flinch. Daniel rose slowly, buttoned his jacket, and placed two thick folders on the table. Exhibit A. Unopened pension recalculation notices found in Ms. O'Connor's daughter's residence. Hidden, discarded, intercepted. Exhibit B. Audio recording of verbal admission. Exhibit C. Screenshots of public defamation following legal notice. Exhibit D. Financial history from the Metropolitan Transit Authority confirming substantial unpaid entitlements. He placed one last folder down. Exhibit E. Witness testimony from Officer Ramon Torres. Heads in the gallery turned as Torres entered from the back, wearing his transit blues. He stood tall as he was sworn in, gaze calm but resolute. Daniel guided him gently. "You were present on the date in question?" "Yes." "What did you witness?" Torres's voice didn't shake. I witnessed a woman, Miss O'Connor, publicly humiliated at a turnstile by her daughter, called old cow in front of dozens of commuters. I intervened because her ID identified her as a retired MTA employee. I've seen hundreds of cases of fare evasion. This wasn't that. This was someone being reduced, stripped of dignity. And what happened after? I contacted MTA administration. I believed she deserved recognition, not ridicule. That moment changed. Something. For her, and for everyone who heard it. Diane shifted visibly, finally rattled. Her lips twitched like she was holding back a rebuttal, but the judge raised a hand before she could speak. Let him finish. Torres looked at Maggie directly. She didn't ask for attention. She didn't even ask for fairness. She just handed me an ID and said, 30 years? That told me everything I needed to know. Daniel turned back to the bench. Your Honor, this is not about family drama. It is about theft. Of dignity. Of agency. Of legally earned compensation. Silence. Steinberg glanced through the exhibits again, her pen moving slowly, precisely. Then she folded her hands. Ms. O'Connor, she said, turning to Maggie. Do you wish to speak? Maggie stood. She didn't raise her voice, didn't shake. She didn't even look at Diane. I was a mother who believed silence was love. That letting them speak louder meant I was being kind. That my worth had an expiration date once I stopped wearing a uniform. I don't believe that anymore. She nodded once and sat back down. The judge didn't hesitate. Findings. The court recognizes clear and convincing evidence of elder exploitation, financial suppression, and reputational harm. A protective order is granted. Diane O'Connor is barred from accessing Margaret O'Connor's accounts, benefits, or property. Restitution review is approved. All legal control returns to the petitioner, Diane's face drained of color. She opened her mouth. The judge didn't look up. This is not a conversation. This is a ruling. Kyle finally glanced over at Maggie, but it was too late. Daniel leaned toward her. You did it. Maggie's hands, folded in her lap, remained still. But something inside them, deep in the tendons, the memory of paper pushing and child raising and check signing, felt different now, unburdened. As the court dismissed, Torres stepped quietly toward her. You want an escort out? He asked. No, Maggie said, standing tall. But I'll walk with you. They left the courtroom side by side, past benches of silent observers and a daughter with nothing left to say. The swipe didn't go through. Diane stood at the Bloomingdale's checkout, platinum card poised in the chip reader. The cashier gave a polite smile and tilted her head. Could you try again, ma'am? Diane blinked like she'd misheard. Reinserted the card. Waited. Declined. Again. She pulled out her phone, opened her banking app, and watched the screen load like it was mocking her. Red flags. Frozen. Restricted pending legal action. What the hell? She muttered, stepping back from the counter. Kyle, standing behind her with his hands in his coat pockets, didn't even pretend to act surprised. Call the bank, Diane snapped. Fix this. He didn't move. You fix it. I said, call the... You broke it, Kyle said quietly. Not me. She turned to him, her voice low and venomous. Do you really think I'm going to let her win? He looked at her then. Really looked. And for the first time in years, his gaze wasn't confused or complicit. It was done. Diane, he said softly. She already did. Maggie stood at her window in Queens, the same one she'd watched Diane's car pull away from weeks ago. It was early evening now, and the street below glowed golden in the slant of the setting sun. Lily sat beside her on the couch, reading an email aloud from Daniel. Restitution hearing date confirmed. Financial recovery process has begun. Full control of benefits, pension, and back pay now legally assigned. Maggie nodded slowly, as though something inside her was finally catching up to what had already been decided. Is it weird I don't feel triumphant? She asked quietly. Lily looked at her. Because it was never about winning. Maggie smiled, just slightly. Right. A knock at the door broke the quiet. Lily rose to open it. Linda Farrell stepped in, scarf wrapped tight against the wind, holding a small potted plant and a thick white envelope. For your desk, she said, placing the plant gently on the table. And for your future, she added, handing Maggie the envelope. Maggie opened it and skimmed the top page. MTA confirmation of pension reinstatement plus lump sum retroactive distribution deposit pending. $84,219.67. She didn't gasp, didn't cry. She just nodded, calmly. Linda stepped closer. I'll be recommending you for formal commendation at next month's board meeting. You deserve more than a check. Maggie reached out and took her hand. Thank you, she said. But honestly, this is enough. Lily came back from the kitchen holding a fresh cup of tea and handed it to her grandmother. Maggie took it slowly, held it in both hands. She tried to erase me, she said quietly. Like I was a liability. A leftover. She underestimated you, Linda said. Maggie nodded. And I underestimated myself. Outside, a wind picked up. Sharp but clean, like autumn sweeping out something stale. Diane's world was freezing now. Her access, her power, her narrative, all seized and examined under the same systems she thought she could manipulate. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was a click, a frozen account, a public silence that said, no more. Maggie sipped her tea, eyes still on the sky. Justice has interest, she whispered. The pawn shop was dusty and overlit. Rows of scratched guitars, rusted power tools, and mismatched china sets resting under harsh fluorescent glare. It wasn't the kind of place Diane O'Connor usually stepped into, but desperation had stripped her of preferences. She placed a carved wooden jewelry box and an ornate mirror onto the counter. Antique, she said, smiling tight. Real wood. Belonged to my mother, the clerk. A tired-looking man in a Mets hoodie glanced at the items, then at Diane. You got ID? She pulled it out fast, like she'd practiced. Won't get a better deal for pieces like this. The man didn't respond. He flipped open a small booklet taped behind the counter. Fraud Alert Log, NYPD Community Watch Division. Diane didn't notice, too busy looking around the store, calculating what else she might bring in next time. The clerk studied her ID, the mirror, and the log again. Then he excused himself, stepping into the back. Diane checked her watch, already annoyed. In the back room, the clerk was dialing. Yeah, 77th Precinct? I got a woman here trying to offload items flagged in a pending elder protection case. O'Connor. Yeah, that one. She's here right now. Maggie was folding laundry when the call came in. Daniel's name flashed across the screen. Hi, Daniel, she answered, not pausing in her folding. Are you sitting down? He asked. She smiled faintly. I'm too old to be knocked over by news. She tried to sell your things, he said. A pawn shop owner on Flatbush recognized the name from the fraud bulletin. He called it in. Maggie didn't stop folding. What did she try to sell? Jewelry box. Mirror. Things we listed on your asset declaration. The cops are holding her for questioning. There was a long pause. Then Maggie said, Thank you for telling me first. Daniel's voice softened. I'll handle the rest. When Lily got the text, she read it twice, then again, then sat on the edge of her bed, phone trembling in her hand. Mom arrested. Trying to pawn Grandma's stuff. What is wrong with her? She didn't cry. She didn't scream. But when she walked into the living room and found Maggie carefully placing folded towels into the linen closet, something inside her broke. "She tried to sell your furniture," Lily said, barely above a whisper. Maggie looked over. "I know." Lily blinked, as if the calmness somehow hurt more than rage would have. "You're not even angry?" "I was," Maggie said. "For years." Quietly. "Now I'm tired." A moment later, the front door buzzed. Lily opened it to find Kyle standing there, rumpled, pale, carrying nothing. He stepped inside slowly, not ashamed, just hollowed out. "I didn't know she was going to do that," he said. Lily folded her arms. "And if she had told you?" He didn't answer. He looked at Maggie, eyes raw. "I'm out. I can't be part of this anymore. I don't even recognize her." Maggie nodded once. "Then don't be." Kyle opened his mouth like he wanted to say something else, but whatever it was, he didn't earn the right to. He walked out. Maggie turned back to Lily. "You okay?" she asked. Lily looked down, nodded. "I'm learning," she said. "Me too," Maggie replied. The sun was going down now, stretching long shadows across the living room floor. Outside, traffic murmured. Somewhere, a siren wailed, then faded. Maggie stepped to the window again. She didn't need to watch Diane anymore. She knew how desperation looked. She had seen it with her own mother, with friends, with herself once. But this was different. This was someone being exposed not by opposition, but by her own unraveling. She watched the streetlight flicker on. "Let the law handle it," she murmured. "Let her face herself." Lily stood beside her, silent. Truth didn't rush. It didn't scream. It just waited. Quiet. Intact. Unblinking. The community center auditorium smelled faintly of wood polish and city dust. Rows of metal folding chairs were arranged in careful symmetry. A modest podium stood on a raised platform flanked by two banners: MTA Service Recognition Program and Office of Councilman Harris, Queens District 6. Maggie stood just inside the entrance, her navy coat draped over one arm, dressed in a slate gray pantsuit that Lily had picked out, pressed to perfection. Her hair, freshly cut and gently curled, shimmered silver under the overhead lights. Lily straightened Maggie's collar. "You look like a retired colonel," she said, grinning. Maggie glanced down at her slacks. "I feel like a borrowed library book." "Good," Lily whispered, "because overdue books still matter." From across the room, Daniel gave them a thumbs up. Linda Farrell stood beside him in a burgundy blazer, holding a plaque wrapped in tissue. The buzz in the room was quiet but warm. Staff from multiple transit stations had come. Old dispatchers, shift supervisors, and new hires who barely remembered paper time cards. A few even clutched photos. One had printed out the viral Facebook thread defending Maggie. At precisely 6 p.m., Councilman Harris approached the podium. He cleared his throat and smiled. "Tonight, we honor a public servant who carried New York not with headlines, but with highlighters, who held the city's pulse not through politics, but through people." He paused, then looked out into the crowd. "Ms. Margaret O'Connor." A ripple of applause broke across the room. Maggie stepped forward slowly, her step steady. She didn't rush. She didn't duck her head. She walked like someone who had once been invisible in her own story, and now chose the spotlight like she was owed it. At the podium, Harris gestured to the small screen behind them. A slideshow began. Photos from Maggie's early years in the MTA, her in a gray uniform at the Brooklyn desk, a candid from a 1998 schedule overhaul meeting, a team photo during the blizzard reroute of 2006. Then Torres took the mic. "I met Ms. O'Connor at a turnstile," he began, clearing his throat. "She didn't ask for help. She didn't ask for credit. All she did was hand me an ID and say, 30 years. But something about the way she said it stopped the station. He looked out over the audience. And that's the thing about dignity. You don't need to raise your voice to carry it. You just need to live long enough not to let others bury it. He stepped aside. Linda Farrell approached next, smiling warmly. Maggie, she said, you trained us. You protected us. You raised half this workforce. And now, finally, we get to say your name where it belongs. She held up the plaque. Margaret O'Connor, 30 years of exemplary service to the City of New York, MTA Division. With honor, with gratitude, with full restoration. The applause grew. Then the envelope came out. Linda handed it over with both hands. Pension officially reinstated. Back pay confirmed. But this. She gestured to the room. This is the interest. Maggie didn't cry. But her throat caught. Lily reached her first, wrapping her arms around her grandmother's waist and squeezing like she was anchoring something down that had finally come loose. The standing ovation rose, slow, then thunderous. Maggie turned once, scanned the crowd, and caught a glimpse of the back row. Kyle. He wasn't clapping. But he wasn't leaving either. He just watched, unmoving, alone. Diane wasn't there. Her absence felt louder than if she'd shouted. But no one asked. Because this moment didn't need her. This moment belonged to Maggie. As the applause faded, Maggie stepped back from the spotlight, holding the plaque against her chest. Not like a trophy, but like a name tag returned after too long misplaced. Lily whispered into her ear, "They finally saw you." Maggie smiled gently, eyes glinting with something brighter than tears. "They didn't just see me," she said. "They stood." She glanced toward the nearest exit. Not for escape, but for movement forward. Because after 30 years and one long reckoning, her walk no longer led out of the room. It led into the next one. The subway platform hummed with its usual rhythm, distant screeches, stray announcements muffled by decades-old speakers, the soft rustle of commuters shifting on their feet. Maggie stood at the base of the stairs, just past the turnstiles. No ID in hand this time, no purse clutched tightly, no daughter at her back whispering venom. This time she was flanked by Lily on one side and Officer Torres on the other, his uniform crisp, hers soft. Generations, side by side. She stepped forward. The turnstile clicked. No beep, no card swipe. She rode free. Not because she had to, because someone had made sure the scanner knew her name now. As she stepped into the waiting car, the train operator tipped his cap through the window and gave a subtle thumbs up. She nodded back. Inside the train, they found a row of empty seats. Torres remained standing, hand resting lightly on the nearest pole. Lily sat beside Maggie, phone half out of her pocket. The screen glowed with an open article, From Turnstile to Tribute, How a Quiet MTA Clerk Changed Policy and Perception. The byline from a local paper was still climbing in shares. At first, the car was quiet. Then, slowly, like the spread of recognition across a crowded room, eyes began to shift. A middle-aged man in a construction vest looked at her twice, then once more. A young woman with a messenger bag whispered to her friend and nodded discreetly toward Maggie. Then the applause started. It wasn't loud. It wasn't showy. It was soft. Private. A few scattered claps from those who'd seen the article, who'd read the post thread, who remembered. Someone said, "That's her." Someone else nodded. 30 years. Lily glanced around, eyes wide with pride. She didn't try to record it, didn't post it to social media. She just leaned in closer to Maggie and said, "Feels different now, doesn't it?" Maggie didn't answer. She was too busy watching the reflection in the train window. The old woman who had once been invisible, now sitting like her name had been reattached to her body. Not as a title, as a truth. Torres spoke quietly. "You know, I've walked this line for years. Never seen a platform fall quiet like it did that day. Maggie looked at him. That day felt like it might be the end. He shook his head. It was the opening credits. They rode past 3 stops in peaceful silence. Outside the window, the city pulsed on. Chipped billboards, graffiti-tagged service boxes, and stairwells painted in fading layers of decades-old decisions. Then, at the 4th stop, a familiar station slid into view. Lily touched Maggie's hand. Want to get off here? Just for the walk? Maggie looked up at the sign. Jamaica Center Parsons/Archer, the site of her longest shift. Her last real one. She stood slowly, smoothed the front of her coat. As they stepped off the train, the scent of the underground washed over them. Metal, motion, and memory. And this time, the station didn't feel like a threshold. It felt like a throne. A woman with a toddler passed by, glanced at Maggie and said, "Thank you for what you did." She didn't say what she meant, but Maggie understood. Far uptown, in a cold apartment, Diane was scrolling through headlines in a bathrobe that no longer fit the part. A name once spoken in mockery now traveled louder than hers ever had, on screens, in whispers, in train cars filled with respect. And no matter how many times she refreshed the page, her version of the story was gone. Drowned, outrun, replaced by truth. Maggie exhaled as the wind of a passing express train brushed her coat, lifting the hem just slightly. "I paid my fare long ago," she murmured. Lily tilted her head. "What's that, Grandma?" Maggie smiled, soft and sure. "Tickets paid in respect." They turned together and stepped toward the exit, not as passengers, as survivors. The notary flipped the final page, stamped it with a quiet thunk, and slid it across the table toward Maggie. "Congratulations," she said. "Your trust is fully finalized." Maggie adjusted her reading glasses and signed the last line in blue ink, her name curling like it had 30 years earlier on her employee badge. Lily sat beside her, still and silent. She hadn't spoken much during the process, just listened, read asked questions. The seriousness in her face wasn't fear, it was reverence. The folder in front of her now held Maggie's last will and trust. A modest estate, modestly worded, but the intention was anything but small. Maggie turned to her granddaughter. "It's all yours. The apartment, the pension remainder, the savings. I've put it where it'll grow." Lily blinked. "Grandma." Maggie shook her head gently and pulled a folded note from her purse. "I don't need you to say thank you. I need you to read this someday, when someone tries to convince you you're too small, or too soft, or too late." She placed it in Lily's palm, warm from her own. The note read, in clean, looped cursive, "Never let them make you feel less. They don't get to decide your value. You do." Lily pressed the paper to her chest like a life raft. Later that afternoon, the buzzer rang downstairs. When Maggie opened the door, Linda Farrell stood there. No entourage, no driver, no camera crew. Just a woman in a tan trench coat, holding a slim white envelope. "I could have mailed it," Linda said, "but I wanted to hand-deliver this one." She stepped inside and passed the envelope to Maggie, who opened it slowly. Final pension disbursement issued. $84,219.67. Processed, posted, and permanent. No pending, no provisional, no subject to change. Just earned. Maggie looked up. "Feels different in paper than on a screen." Linda smiled. "It should. Paper stays." She gestured to the living room. "I saw the ceremony." "You didn't cry, I did," Maggie said. "Just not where they could see." Linda laughed quietly, then pulled Maggie into a brief hug, the kind only given when something truly ends and something better takes its place. That weekend, Maggie stood at the Jamaica Center platform one last time. Not to ride, just to see it. Torres stood near the kiosk, arms folded, nodding at regulars. When he spotted her, he straightened. "No fare needed, Ms. O'Connor," he called. "I'm not boarding," she replied. "I came to check on the heartbeat." Torres approached and gave a small, sincere salute. Maggie chuckled. "I'm not military." "No, ma'am," he said. "But you led troops anyway." He handed her a small envelope, neatly folded. Inside, a laminated card, her original MTA employee ID. Restored, reissued, and updated with a note from the department, "In service, permanently honored." She ran her thumb across it, then slid it gently into her wallet. On Monday, the mail came late. Among bills and flyers, a cream-colored envelope sat near the bottom. Lily handed it over. Maggie opened it carefully. Inside, an official letter from Councilman Harris, handwritten across the bottom. "We thank you not for surviving the system, but for dignifying it, and for reminding us that some workers don't retire quietly. They rise." Maggie tucked the letter inside her desk drawer, next to her commendation plaque and Lily's note, now reread and tear-stained. She poured herself a cup of tea, let it steep, sat by the window. This time she didn't think of Diane, didn't picture the courtrooms or the pawn shops, or the silence of being unseen. She pictured the platform, the applause, the hands that once pushed paper now held legacy. She took a sip. The tea was hot, steady, enough. "Dignity lasts longer than insults," she murmured. Then she stood, slipped on her coat, and stepped outside. Just one more errand. One more return to herself.